Hello, and welcome to Locutors of Trek Supplemental, the podcast where we talk about the people, places, and things of Star Trek. So, grab yourself a Roctacino with a Jackarai P, or your synth selection of choice, and join us far beyond the stars.
Locutors of Trek.
Program initiated. Enter when ready.
Welcome to our Far Beyond the Stars Supplemental, where I will be as much an auditor of Trek as the rest of you, as Dave has promised us a kaleidoscopic journey of insight and discovery about this episode.
This to me is the
No pressure.
This is like Prospero's late speech in The Tempest of Shakespeare when he says, "We are such things as dreams are made on," you know? I feel like this episode is a kind of meditation on what the entire series is, that both refracts what's happening but also kind of dynamically influences everything that's going on as well.
This is my favorite episode of Star Trek TV life. I love this episode. I just watched it again today, and it never loses its power or its interest. It just delivers every single time.
One of the things I notice about it is that the actors involved, you can tell they know they're doing something that's really got legs while they're playing it. You know? That you can tell they're having fun, but and just that it's a fun script to work on and it's really great writing. But also I think you can tell that when they were looking at the script, they were sitting there thinking, "Oh, this is a good one."
I can't describe how much I love all of these characters that they play in this episode. Bashir, everything he says is just hilarious. I forget his character's name.
I think it's Jules, isn't it?
Is it Jules?
Yeah.
Oh wow, like Jules Verne.
It's lovely, right?
Yeah.
It's a kind of
That's cool.
two-directional play. And I guess that's partly what I mean by kaleidoscopic in this sense. This is, full disclosure, the kaleidoscope as sort of a metaphor has fascinated me for a number of years. I have a background in classical and medieval philosophy, but also in various traditions that are both known to and unknown to both the ancient and the medieval worlds. But one of the things that strikes me particularly about this episode is, first of all, the notion sort of being lost, of being bewildered, of being out of place, but also too much in place in some ways. And it in that sense, it resonates for me with that sense, say, in the first few lines of Dante's Divine Comedy, where, he says, nel mezzo del camino di nostra vita mi ritrovai in una selva selvaggia, right? In the midst of the journey of our life, I found myself in a dark wood where I had lost the right way. And this is a moment like that, I think, for Sisko. The episode begins with the loss of the Cortez, his friend Quentin's ship, I think, is it Quentin Solomon, maybe?
Yeah.
His ship, who, he'd introduced him to his wife, is what he says right off the bat, right?
Yeah.
These ruptures are happening all the time. And it's just cracking his world open. Grief does that. It cracks us open. And I think that's part of where it comes in from.
He's questioning being in Starfleet again. And his father says to him, that's fine, I support you no matter what you do, but Quentin may have something to say to you if he were still here. And Ben's just like, but he's not here, and that's my point.
Yeah, precisely. And the other thing that occurs to me in terms of why I proposed in conversation to Davan some time ago the notion for this episode, which is kind of this kaleidoscopic treatment of the text, or is that the term itself, which had already been sort of philosophically fascinating to me, has some etymological work you can do with it that allows us to kind of get at this a little more. So
do we start at the beginning of the episode, or Where do you start this kaleidoscopic journey? What I find in this episode, it almost makes you feel dizzy. Cisco is seeing Benny, but Benny is also seeing Cisco.
In the windows.
In the windows, they're seeing each other in equal proportion, almost. And that just makes the episode really surreal. That's what really struck me this time. I've watched that episode so many times, but...
You mean the surreality of it?
Yeah, where in the end, of course, Ben is like, what if we are the dream and Benny's the real guy? And I always thought that was just a nice little ending to the episode. But at this time, where you just see them seeing each other almost in equal proportion, like they each have the same sort of amount of hallucinations seeing the other.
Well, and they're equally substantial, right? Yeah.
Every other time I was just like, no, Deep Space Nine is not the real spot. Not this time. I watched it again. Like, that episode gives you something different every time.
Oh, it really does. You know, the thing that stuck out at me the last time I watched it was how the whole thing begins, right? There's that scene about the Cortez and the loss of the ship and the crew and the captain, his friend. Kira steps out after she puts one more, data pad of stuff on top of the pile of them he's already got on his desk. And his dad comes in and he begins immediately to apologize. This is
first time he's ever left Earth.
First time he's ever left Earth, and he's letting his dad down, right, in his own mind. Not only is he letting the Federation down, he's letting his own father down on this visit. And then, all of a sudden, this guy in a fedora and a gray suit walks by. Mind you, great disguise for Odo in 1962.
He got good at doing
or 1954
faces.
or whatever year it is,
Oh, he said he couldn't do faces.
It's true. Give him a couple hundred years to practice or whatever,
He saw Douglas.
Yeah, he saw Douglas, the publisher. Or the editor, sort of editor-in-chief, not the publisher. Publishers are always on his back.
Publisher's Mr. Stone.
Yeah. And, that's lovely to me, right? Like, that from the opening of the episode, it's shot through with these confounding just sort of permeations or permeabilities of these two realities.
He says, who was that man? Did anyone see that man? And no one's seen him. So there's obviously something not right off the start. Like, that's before they've kind of thrown you right into the Benny Russell world. But already something's happening.
Yeah.
On the Cisco Deep Space Nine plane of reality.
Oh, yes.
Time.
in the reality we expect to be in.
As we know, Benjamin Sisko is not a completely linear being.
Well, you reminded me of something in one of my favorite dead friends, a guy who died about 270 CE called Plotinus, who in one of his major writings, something called Ennead 5.3, he talks about how what he calls psyche or soul, the sort of whatever is the consciousness, the life in us, though it is non-spatiotemporal, yet it is distributed among bodies. And it always made me think that, doesn't that mean that a single sort of capital S soul or consciousness, couldn't that just be animating a bunch of things at various points? And if he's a non-linear being, it makes a lot of sense that maybe there is this connection that really does extend through space and time between these two men who are these odd other side of a window from each other.
What's it like to be a non-linear being? It's like being a plant or a mushroom that's seasonal, but your season is broader scope of space-time.
Sure.
Just like, so the entity that is Ben Sisko just pops up every season, whatever that means.
Yeah, perhaps, eh? It brings up the whole question of whether the Sisko himself is, in that sense, a kind of an avatar creature, or whether
of whatever you are when you're part prophet.
Exactly. Well, of one of the prophets, right? In that sense, right? It's the way that prophets would extrude themselves into space and time, and so it can at once ask that sort of cyclical question, and then on the other side, the Ben Sisko who finds himself in contact with the Temple of the Prophets is himself individuated and unique, a single pitch of the baseball, who within all his uniqueness then comes to take on this sort of a a sort of an incarnational role. As opposed to an avatar, he becomes a kind of prophet mortal, right? Some joining of these two where they're not necessarily a mixed hybrid being, because I think his phases are in some sense in tension with each other through a lot of the series, and we see that reflected in the way that he relates to or doesn't relate to the prophets and to Bajor and to himself in various moments, I think. And I think either way we look at him, I think is revealing, because I don't think either view is quite exactly the Cisco, but it's precisely that non-linearity that makes it defy neatly fitting either expectation for me,
So then we're thrown into the world of Benny Russell, sci-fi writer. A lot of our cast members are sci-fi writers.
Yeah. I think the first person he runs into is Colmini's Arthur, yes.
Arthur's fantastic. Arthur is a guy who has trouble getting sentences out, but everybody knows what he's going to say anyway, so it's very easy to just finish his sentences for him. It's just like, in that very first scene, he just walks up, Benny, I was, going to work. Yes. We can walk there together. Exactly. I love that character.
Arthur's quite delightful. And really, in many ways, the absolute opposite of Chief O'Brien, who is forthright and articulate and knows what he's doing in almost every situation. Or he knows that he doesn't, and he's like, well, I'm going to have to seek direction from somebody. Arthur is just a sort of general muddle. It's beautiful.
Where they cross over is Arthur loves robots because they're efficient.
That's true.
And
they're efficient. You are a robot.
No offense. Who wants to see men from Mars? Forget about it.
Now,
flying saucers?
I confess, the first time I watched that episode was very early in the time I was watching Deep Space Nine, and I completely missed that Aaron Eisenberg had a part in the episode, because that's the first role I ever met him in. Aaron Eisenberg's actual face is Nog, to be perfectly honest, in my imagination, just sort of the wonderful land of theory that exists in my own mind. And so seeing him as that newspaper boy before I actually knew what he looked like, no, I didn't even connect the voice. Completely slipped by me. It was only on, I think, my second or third viewing of the episode that I was like, what's going on here? What a clever Easter egg.
Then they go to work, and we see the rest of the cast. Well, most of them.
Mm-hmm.
Kira, Julian, which, for the first time, I realized they made those two a couple. And they were a couple in real life at the time. That was
True enough.
Yeah. That was a funny little nod.
True enough. And I think Dax is also there. Or she arrives there later in the episode, I apologize. That's right. And we see, many,
Armin Shimmerman.
Armin Shimmerman is there.
Plays Herb.
It's a really beautiful character. Honestly.
You calling me a red? Calm down, we're writers, not Vikings.
Again, a very different character from Quark, but they have a lot in common, Nothing slips by Herb.
No.
Right? I mean,
no,
he always sees what the play is and what the action is that's going on. And in that sense, he has a kind of similarity to Quark, but it's like, turn the kaleidoscope one or two clicks around, and that same trait turns into a guy who I think what we see in Herb is somebody who is quite socially conscious, who has a lot of empathy for his fellow human being, and who has very little time for the sort of blandishments of the establishment in respect of when a change is going to come,
And even the Odo character, Douglas, he's obviously kind of played off as more of the bad guy in a lot of the story. You can imagine that character is actually having their back as much as he can in his dealings with Mr. Stone. And of course he's losing those battles.
Sure.
But of course they don't see that, and he's not the kind of character that would tell them about that.
Yeah, well, and you know, yeah, I mean, the other side of that is, you know, he's hired
It's
Benny
a very
at some
nuanced
point, right?
character he's playing there.
Yeah, and it's lovely to see in the various depictions of these characters the sort of stakes in what you could call a kind of meditation on the civil rights movement, the conditions out of which the civil rights movement kind of arises through the late 40s, 50s into the 60s. And you know that there were people that were in a lot of very kind of nuanced, very granularly different positions who will support to a certain point, and then maybe not after a certain point. And all of those questions were really clearly available to people who were working at the time. You know, I was watching a really interesting conversation between 5 leaders of the black community in the early 60s, including Martin Luther King and a number of others, moderated by a journalist who himself was African American. And they're talking about the concerns of the civil rights movement and how to advance that cause at the time, and their sensibility about the fears of citizens who were not as engaged in the struggle yet, and who didn't consider themselves to be part of any movement, you know, in particular, who might not consider themselves very political, but at
That's
the same
the character
time,
that Cassidy plays in that episode.
yeah.
She's like, I don't care what happens 100 years from now. Now is what matters. And she just wants to buy a restaurant and make some money and marry Benny and just live her life as best she can.
Yeah, and she doesn't want to get hassled while she does it, right?
Mm.
And she knows, in one sense, that the neighborhood in which they're planning to do that is one where they would get hassled less. But there's that overall sort of miasma of violence and suppression.
Bully cops.
Exactly.
Jeffrey Combs and Mark Alima.
Now, I mean, they're I hate those two guys,
Where'd you get that suit?
but they play them brilliantly.
They do.
They do a couple of great heavies that way.
Neighborhood's going to hell in a handbasket. They're the bullies, and that's what.
And you know, again, there are these interesting comparisons you can make between Wei-Yun and Ducat and those two characters. That they are convinced of their own rightness, that they move without much empathy for the persons around them who they consider lesser beings. You know, Ducat's relationship to the Bajorans is, while I think often enough on the sort of main non-kaleidoscoped show, we often see it more depicted in terms of, say, the Holocaust or the actions of the Khmer Rouge or other genocidal moments like that. I think we can also see the ways in which Cardassians treat Bajorans as reflecting some of those injustices that would speak particularly to an American context as well. Well, American and, you know, Canadian context as well.
Yep. And then Benny writes his story, Deep Space Nine, starring Captain Benjamin Sisko.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great story. Everyone's super impressed. Even Douglas.
Yeah.
Actually, before that, J.G. Hertzler comes in with the pictures. The picture may be rubbish, but the story will be art.
Yeah.
What? So I had a lot of crowd on my Franks last night. Just draws like a sexy lady and they're like imitating it.
You know, that sketch really reminded me of the the magazines you get in the mail when you were a kid. You know, Ellery Queen magazine or Nova or one of those things, and the cover was always this piece of art that just had so much intimation of a world and a story and the action of a narrative in it. I really dug the way they used the art of those, in a certain sense, kind of pulp magazines, but I love pulp stories. You know, some of my favorites, you know, Lovecraft or Robert Howard's Conan, you know, for all of their flaws that come again from a world full of injustice and based on a kind of accepted bigotry and racism that was just kind of par for the course in many contexts. There's still stories that sort of shine with imagination and this suggestion of a world where things can be different, you know.
The image of Deep Space Nine that the J.G. Hertzer character draws, where it's stylized almost like the Jetsons.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a cool looking image. I kind of want a poster of that image. It's like the Jetsons meets Deep Space Nine, and it looks really cool.
Yeah. That sort of Hanna-Barbera art style, eh?
Yeah.
From Saturday morning cartoons, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know, and then the disaster comes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He's thrilled about this story, and the issue comes.
3 cents a word?
And nothing.
Nothing.
Not a word from the publishers. No, they're just, that story's not going to be in there.
Nope.
And
not up to the usual standards.
That's right. The usual standards. All of that polite doublespeak that was to sort of enforce the status quo, right? And it starts to crack Benny. It starts to really, I think, stress his capacities. Because on the other hand, he's involved in this great relationship that is starting to make claims on him as well, right? That he doesn't, you know, he's got this romance, he's got, and she's asking him, you know, is this writing thing really going to work? Shouldn't we make a practical move while we can?
Yeah, well, are you going to get the respect in that field? Like, before that, they even have where the viewers wanted to know what the writers looked like. Yeah. They're going to have the photograph. And they tell, of course, KC, Kira, to sleep in that morning.
Yeah.
Of course, Benny's like, I suppose I'm sleeping in as well. And Douglas is like, well, as far as everybody knows, Benny, you know, you're as white as they are. Might as well just let them keep on thinking that.
Yeah.
On a lighter note, Douglas tells them the viewers want to know what they look like. Kira's just like, tell them we look like writers. We're poor, needy, and wildly attractive.
That is a great line. Yeah. Poor, needy, and wildly attractive. Oh.
So you know what I noticed for the first time?
What's that?
The Kira character is making instant iced tea because it's all new and fancy.
Okay.
She puts it on the table. And later in that scene, Benny is stirring the iced tea, and it's way, way, way darker and thicker than it was before. So he must have poured all the rest of the crystals in there, and he was just stirring it.
It's like the first time you try and make hot chocolate.
Yeah, he must have tasted it, and he's just like, nah. And he poured all the rest of it in. But that's like the most subtle thing ever, and they don't draw any attention to it at all, but I just noticed.
Oh, that's funny. So, in the midst of all of this, Benny's been having these one-off sort of encounters with a street preacher who keeps telling him, the words, Brother Benny, write the words. Listen to the prophets. Walk with the prophets.
Played by the great Brock Peters.
Oh, man.
Admiral Cartwright.
Oh, yeah.
He was a bit of a fiend.
And he's had his own kind of multiple character run on Trek, which is cool.
Cartwright. Who's Cartwright? Apparently I'm Cartwright. You're Cartwright?
That can't be right. Yeah, this street preacher begins to sort of act like a sort of link to the sort of meta quality of what's going on here for me.
Yeah.
In the episode. But he's also, if I recall, he shows up in and around pivotal moments. And he also is present at Benny's beating, I think, if I recall correctly.
Perhaps he's even the prophets, because he seems to be encouraging the course of that story and Benny's actions, as like the prophets tend to do when it comes to Ben.
Absolutely, yeah. And as we know, the prophets tend to take on the faces and voices of people from Sisko's memories.
And Joseph Sisko has lain with a prophet.
That's true. That's true. I've never phrased it like that, but yes. You, man who was lain with a prophet.
I love the strings I can draw for you, Dave.
Yeah, but it's...
Oh, my.
Having some technical difficulties here.
Watch them baffles.
Yeah, I'm baffled. So, where were we?
Well, Benny's story was rejected.
Yeah.
The whole issue was canceled for the month.
Indeed.
You know, actually, before we get too far, I think we've kind of glossed over the characters that he encounters at the diner.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Cassidy character and Jake,
Yeah,
who plays Jimmy, I think.
I think so, yes.
Bit of a hustler.
Yeah, likes to be his own boss.
Yeah, well,
I think as he likes to put it.
Ben tells him to get a job. He's like, what, as a delivery boy or a dishwasher? The opportunities aren't looking too bright for young Jimmy.
He's looking to avoid eternal destitution.
Eternal destitution. So if you could just buy this watch, it would really help me out.
And then, of course, there's the
Willie.
baseball star.
See the game last night? Went 2 for 4. Should have heard the crowd carrying on.
You know, he's got a fine suit. He's got a good hat.
Mhm.
He's handsome.
Very fine hat.
He knows he's a catch, right?
Hmm?
Pardon the very intendable pun. And they're all making their way in a world they know is inherently hostile to, you know, their desire to get ahead and to achieve legal and financial and political equality. And I think in some ways you see that, you know, some of those characters are playing representations of blackness that were more acceptable to a white community at the time. Sports figures, a, you know, sort of slightly shady rascal, or you know, thug if you prefer, as well, and then someone in a service position, right? Benny is a bit of an outlier. He's transgressing lines by trying to operate in a sphere of art which had been essentially claimed as the preserve of a white imagination.
And he's constantly questioned because of that by all of those characters you just mentioned.
Sure, absolutely, right?
Jimmy says to him, he's like, your life's no better than mine. You're writing about white people on the moon.
Yeah. He in a certain sense gets it from both sides, because his desire puts him as a kind of he's almost like a Chirkendoos figure, you know? It's not quite a chicken, not quite a duck, not quite a turkey, not quite a goose. He's not quite anywhere, you know?
Oh, a swan.
No, this is a real story. You've never heard of the Chirkendoos?
No, I don't know the Chirkendoos tale.
You know, like the golden books, like the Ugly Duckling, and
sure.
and all that kind of stuff. There was one
Have some upstairs.
that was published called the Chirkendoos, and it's not. I don't know if it's even in print anymore, but it becomes this story about, it's this like particular fowl in the barnyard who isn't quite like any of these other creatures, right? And so the ducks and the chickens and the turkeys and the geese don't want him or her. I forget whether they say it's him or her. Anyway, so they all kind of cast this person out or give him a hard time or whatever, and then a threat arrives in the barnyard, I think maybe in the form of a fox, and the Chirkendoos goes charging forward and makes this almighty like sort of noise, and the thing runs away, and then everybody loves the Chirkendoos and wants to say, oh, you're actually a chicken, or you're actually a goose, or you're actually a turkey or a duck. And it becomes adopted by certain streams of therapy and counseling and psychology as a sort of term, a Chirkendoos problem. A problem of not fitting until your not fitting makes you sort of valuable, and then you still don't really hold on to you're not really anywhere necessarly, right?
Odo's a bit of a Chirkendoos.
Very much a Chirkendoos, yeah. And I think Benny in this is kind of a Chirkendoos. But still concerned for his community, concerned for the people that he meets in his life, like Jimmy, who he knows may be headed for trouble. Right?
Well, unfortunately, that's what it befalls Jimmy. And in a moment of grief and rage, Benny confronts those two thug cops we saw earlier, and then they beat him up real good.
Yeah, they lay a serious beating on him. And yet through this whole thing, the stories keep coming. Right? He's hospitalized, he comes back, he's walking with
6
pain.
more volumes of the Cisco tales.
Indeed. I think he's on his 6th or 7th story by the time he's coming back into the office. And he can't stop them because he knows they're his best work. You know? I love that too, that the sense of artistic inspiration and the sense of the prophet's compulsion come to be sort of fused in a way together.
I forget the episode now, but he ends up very compelled to write those stories when he's in the insane asylum, writing it on the walls.
Later on, you know, and I never thought we'd see Benny again the first
Neither
time I
did
saw
I.
that episode.
No.
And coming back to
But
it,
I'm glad we did.
I found the episode where we come back really unsettling. Because it takes all of those equivalencies and the equalities of substance between the two sort of instances of this sort of character, Ben or Benny, and it just pushes it so hard. You know, that there was a moment in that second episode where it comes back where I thought, are you actually going to try and wrap things up this way? Are you actually going to just drop it? Like, that would break my soul. It would have been so grim. And even the taste they give us of it is like just kind of deliriating in its brutality and coldness and its lack of empathy. It's like the sort of world we see in present tense, right, or past tense, parts 1 and 2. Its themes are amplified in this sort of kaleidoscopic turning, you know.
I was about to say I'm going to turn the kaleidoscope a couple times just to see where you land.
All right, let's do it.
Turn. Over to you.
So, you know, the brutality of the beating and his return to the office brings us to, I think, the pivotal scene of the whole episode.
Oh no, the one that makes me cry every time.
I
Oh,
can't.
no.
I get a lump in my throat. I well up every time I see this. Where,
The finest acting performance in TV history.
you know, and I think Benny is losing everything in this scene. His writing is being taken away from him. You know, his living as a writer is being taken away from him. Not just a single issue, but the whole magazine is going to be shot if they don't get rid.
Oh yeah, he's fired. Yeah,
He's fired.
he's fired.
You can't fire me,
I quit.
right? And it just
To hell
cracks
with
him in
you.
two.
To hell with Stone.
Exactly. You know, and that
Calm down,
breakdown.
Benny. Calm never got me a goddamn thing.
And in the midst of it, he asserts the thing that you and I have been driving at this whole conversation. They're real.
Oh, that might be my favorite line.
Oh,
Where he's like, that's ancient knowledge. Pointing at all of them. He's like, you all read it. It's real. Because they pulped all the papers. He's like, you can pulp it whatever you want. He's like, but they're real. You all read it. They're real for you. And you can't do anything about that.
yeah. Yeah.
Love it. And I created it.
I mean, in that he's in the moment he's being reviled and rejected. He is a god in his creative act.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's a stunning disjunction. It's a stunning breakdown. It's a stunning moment of a brutal injustice, which is only followed upon him being dragged away.
Well, he's creating a world that elevates his people. And that's what he's saying. He's like, I've created that world.
Mm-hmm. Even while he himself is being drawn away into the madness of the prophetic voice. You know, this resonates with the prophets that someone like the street preacher is referencing. You know, if we take him at his face value, sort of prima facie, the street preacher there is a man who's on a mission in a hard neighborhood, or a neighborhood that is having a hard time anyway. And he's talking about, you know, Amos and Isaiah and Ezekiel and all those dudes from from the Hebrew scriptures who are the prophets who, almost live a kind of performance art as a way of making their theological and spiritual and political and ethical points. But on the other side, the prophets themselves are asking so much from Sisko personally and from everything that he's implicated in, the Federation, the life of Bajor and the Bajorans, the Cardassian people, the Klingons, everything that he's implicated in by virtue of that role as the emissary at Deep Space Nine. They're asking him enough that it's breaking him. It's beginning to crack his boundaries, his world. It's, as you say, it's turning the kaleidoscope again and again. And then he's in the back of that ambulance. And the preacher's there, and he looks at him and he says, "You are the dreamer and the dream." Whew. I just choked up a little bit here right now. I gotta say. I
didn't.
Like, that's the Shakespearean moment to me. That's the moment where they hit a lasting artistic note that builds from the beginning through to that moment in the episode. It's like a through line that goes through all those weird twists and changes and losses of perspective.
Well, and then Joseph Sisko quotes the Bible to Ben, and Ben's surprised. He's like, "I've never known you to quote the Bible." He's like, "I'm full of surprises."
Exactly. So, a long time ago, several years in fact, when I was first thinking about kaleidoscopes as a philosophical object, I wrote just a couple of paragraphs to try and sketch for myself the idea. And as we're sort of moving toward the close of our conversation today, I thought I'd just put them on record here to really try and draw our conversation full circle. So here we go. The kaleidoscope is a diversion, a toy, a sort of inverse telescope. Images split and merge like as upon the surface of bubbles, forming beautiful, uncanny abstractions. Kaleidoscope means something affording a vision, scope in Greek, of beautiful forms, kalos and eidos. Kalos is the beautiful, the noble, the well-formed, the rightly done, and the auspicious. Prima facie, the kaleidoscope affords a beautiful vision of what is for seeing. A different kalos is a reefing sheet or cable. You could be forgiven for imagining a possible common derivation of the fit, the well-tied, the rightly done, the beautiful from the many tasks of daily life, particularly seafaring. The rightly done and the beautiful allows passage over abyssal depths. Such a passage is Orphic, a journey out of or under the world, over the horizon and away from land. It figures possible destruction, like that of Dante's Ulysses on his cursed flight in Inferno, Canto 26. Implicit in the tale is a certain bewilderment. Ulysses lost all sense of proportion in his headlong, titanic essay upon the god's abode. Kaleidoscope, on second glance, means a beautiful bewilderment.
Kaleidoscopes are pretty.
We look for things to make us go.
I like shapes and colors. Signing off.